The scorching Arizona sun beat down on Abigail Lawson as she stumbled along the dusty trail, her swollen feet screaming with each painful step. 3 days of walking had taken their toll, and the young widow could feel her strength fading with every labored breath in the oppressive heat of the summer of 1876. Abigail's threadbare black dress clung to her slim frame, the fabric damp with perspiration. The small bundle of possessions she carried seemed to grow heavier by the minute. Her late husband's pocket watch, their marriage certificate, and what little money she had managed to save weren't enough to secure passage on the stagecoach. Walking to Tucson had been her only option after being forced from the home she could no longer afford. The distant sound of wagon wheels broke through her exhaustion-induced haze. Abigail tried to quicken her pace, hoping to flag down whoever was approaching, but her legs finally gave out. She collapsed in a heap on the dusty trail, her vision blurring as consciousness began to slip away. Preston James pulled back on the reins of his wagon, bringing his 2 horses to a halt. He had spotted the woman from a distance, watching with concern as she staggered along the trail before collapsing. Without hesitation, he jumped down from his seat, dust billowing around his worn leather boots as he approached her. "Madam, can you hear me?" he asked, kneeling beside her. The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing exhaustion in their blue depths. "Water," she whispered through cracked lips. Preston reached for his canteen, gently lifting her head to help her drink. "Easy now," he cautioned as she gulped eagerly. "Not too fast or you'll make yourself sick." After a few sips, she seemed to regain some clarity. "Thank you, sir." "Preston James," he offered, tipping his hat. "I've got a wagon just up the trail. Let me help you to it." "Abigail Lawson," she replied weakly. "I'm afraid I can't pay you for your trouble." Preston's weathered face softened. "No payment necessary, Mrs. Lawson. Can't leave a lady stranded out here." He noticed the black of her dress then, understanding dawning on his sun-tanned face. A widow, traveling alone. He'd seen enough hardship since moving west to recognize desperation when he saw it. "Let me help you up," he said, carefully slipping his arms beneath her slight frame. Abigail tried to protest, but her strength had abandoned her completely. She felt herself being lifted, the strong arms of this stranger providing the first comfort she'd known in months. The scent of leather, horses, and something uniquely masculine enveloped her as he carried her to his wagon. Preston laid her gently on the back of his wagon, arranging a folded blanket beneath her head. "We're about 4 hours from my ranch," he explained, climbing back into the driver's seat. "You rest now. We'll get you fixed up proper when we arrive." As the wagon began to move, rocking gently over the uneven terrain, Abigail surrendered to exhaustion. Her last conscious thought was that this man, this cowboy with kind eyes and strong hands, might be an angel in disguise. The sun was beginning its descent when Abigail next opened her eyes. The wagon continued its steady pace, and she took a moment to study her rescuer from behind. Broad shoulders strained against a faded blue shirt, and his dark hair curled beneath his hat. Even from this angle, she could see the strength in his posture as he handled the reins with practiced ease. She tried to sit up, wincing as her body protested the movement. "You're awake," Preston observed, glancing back at her. "How are you feeling?" "Better, I think," Abigail replied, though her throat still felt like sandpaper. "Where exactly are we headed, Mr. James?" "My ranch, about an hour out from here now, and please call me Preston." He offered her the canteen again. "Drink some more, you were badly dehydrated." Abigail accepted gratefully. "I didn't think I'd walked that far from the main road." "You're a good 15 miles from anywhere a lady ought to be traveling alone," Preston remarked, concern evident in his voice. "What brings you out this way, if you don't mind my asking?" Abigail hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger, but something in his manner, in the genuine concern he'd shown, convinced her to trust him. "My husband Thomas passed 6 months ago. Fever took him." She swallowed hard against the familiar ache. "The bank took our home in Prescott soon after. I'm headed to Tucson where my cousin lives. She's offered me a place to stay until I can find work." Preston nodded, his expression somber. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Lawson. Abigail, please," she insisted, "and thank you for stopping. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." "No decent man would have done otherwise," Preston replied. "The West is unforgiving to those traveling alone." As they continued their journey, Preston pointed out landmarks, telling her about the territory and his ranch. Abigail found herself drawn to his deep voice and the passion with which he spoke of his land. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of her grief seemed to lighten, if only momentarily, when they crested a hill as the sun was setting. Preston pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below. "James Creek Ranch." Abigail gazed down at the modest spread. A sturdy log cabin stood as the centerpiece, with a barn and several corrals surrounding it. A creek wound through the property, explaining its name. It wasn't grand by any measure, but it had a peaceful, welcoming quality that tugged at Abigail's heart. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "It's not much compared to some of the bigger spreads," Preston admitted, "but it's mine. Worked 7 years to save enough to buy it. Been here 3 years now." "You've built something to be proud of," Abigail told him, recognizing the achievement for what it was. Preston's smile warmed his features as he flicked the reins to get the horses moving again. "It gets lonesome sometimes," he admitted. "Just me and old Joe, my ranch hand. He lives in a small cabin behind the barn." As they approached the house, a lanky older man emerged from the barn. He waved at their approach, his curiosity evident even from a distance. "That's Joe," Preston explained. "Best hand I could ask for. He was a friend of my father's back in Texas." The wagon rolled to a stop and Joe approached, his weathered face creasing with concern when he spotted Abigail. "Evening, boss," he called. "Didn't expect company?" "Joe, this is Mrs. Lawson," Preston introduced as he climbed down. "Found her collapsed on the trail to Tucson. She'll be staying with us until she's recovered." Joe tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam?" "Thank you for your hospitality," Abigail said, attempting to climb down from the wagon herself. Preston was at her side immediately, strong hands at her waist to help her down. "Easy now. Your feet are likely still tender." The moment his hands touched her, Abigail felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her exhaustion. She attributed it to simple gratitude and pushed the feeling aside. "Joe, could you see to the horses?" Preston asked. "I'll get Mrs. Lawson settled inside." "Course, boss," Joe nodded. Already moving to unhitch the team with Preston's support, Abigail made her way into the cabin. It was simple but well kept, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall and sturdy, handcrafted furniture filled the space. "It's not fancy," Preston apologized, guiding her to a chair at the wooden table. "It's wonderful," Abigail assured him, sinking gratefully into the seat. Her gaze took in the small details book stacked on a shelf, a guitar in the corner, hand-sewn curtains at the windows that made this house a home. Preston busied himself lighting a lamp and stoking the banked fire in the hearth. "Are you hungry? I can fix something simple." "Please don't go to any trouble," Abigail protested. "No trouble," Preston insisted, already pulling items from a cupboard. "You need to eat. Rebuilding your strength starts with food." Abigail watched as he moved confidently around the kitchen, slicing bread and cheese, reheating a pot of beans that had been left warming on the edge of the hearth. There was something compelling about this man, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the room. "Do you live alone?" she asked, then immediately regretted the forwardness of her question. "I'm sorry, that was improper of me." Preston chuckled, the sound warm and rich. "No need for apologies. Yes, I live alone, save for Joe's company. Never found the time for courting, I suppose. Building this place took all my attention." He set a plate before her, the simple meal looking more appetizing than anything Abigail had seen in months. "Eat slow," he advised. "Your stomach needs to adjust." Abigail nodded, taking a small bite of the bread. It was fresh and hearty, clearly homemade. "This is delicious," she said. Did you bake this? Preston's cheeks colored slightly beneath his tan. Had to learn to fend for myself out here. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Abigail forcing herself to eat slowly despite her hunger. When she'd finished about half her plate, Preston rose. "Let me show you where you can sleep tonight," he said. "You need proper rest." He led her to a small bedroom off the main room. A narrow bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall with a simple dresser opposite it. "This was meant to be a guest room," he explained, "though you're the first to use it." "Thank you," Abigail said, emotion welling in her throat at his kindness. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Preston shook his head. "No need, just get some rest. We'll figure out how to get you to Tucson once you're recovered." After showing her where to find everything she might need, Preston left her to settle in. Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the quilt, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her fortune had taken. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt safe. She removed her shoes, wincing at the blisters that covered her feet. After washing with the basin of water Preston had provided, she crawled beneath the quilt, her body practically melting into the first real bed she'd slept in for days. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she stared at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, she could hear Preston moving about the house, the domestic sounds oddly comforting. She wondered about this man, this cowboy who had taken in a stranger without hesitation. There was a goodness in him that she hadn't expected to find in this harsh land. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. Abigail opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented before remembering where she was. Sunlight streamed through the small window, casting patterns on the wooden floor. She dressed quickly, relieved to find her feet less painful than the night before. The house was quiet as she emerged from the bedroom, but a covered plate waited on the table with a note beside it. "Gone to check the north pasture. Breakfast here, rest today, back by noon, PJ." The simple consideration brought tears to her eyes. She uncovered the plate to find biscuits, still warm, and a jar of honey. After eating, Abigail decided she couldn't simply sit idle. Her mother had raised her to contribute, never to be a burden. Looking around the cabin, she noticed areas that could use a woman's touch. With determination, she set about cleaning, careful of her still tender feet. She found supplies in a cupboard, soap, rags, and a broom, and began with the hearth, sweeping away ash and arranging the kindling neatly for the evening fire. By mid-morning, she had swept the entire cabin, washed the few dishes left from breakfast, and begun preparing a stew with vegetables she found in a root cellar beneath a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. The physical activity helped clear her mind, giving her purpose again after months of simply surviving. She was kneading dough for fresh bread when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Wiping her hands on her apron, fashioned from a clean dish towel, she moved to the window, watching as Preston dismounted from a magnificent chestnut stallion. His surprise was evident when he entered the cabin to find it scrubbed clean and fragrant with the smell of cooking stew. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, removing his hat, "you shouldn't be on your feet." "Abigail," she reminded him, "and I couldn't very well sit idle while enjoying your hospitality. Besides, keeping busy helps me, not think too much." Understanding flickered in Preston's eyes. He nodded, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "Well, it smells wonderful, but please don't feel obligated. It's the least I can do," Abigail insisted. "I found your vegetable garden. I hope you don't mind that I helped myself." "Not at all. That's what it's there for." Preston moved to the stove, lifting the lid on the pot to inhale the aroma. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this since before I came west." "No family back east?" Abigail asked, returning to her bread dough. Preston leaned against the counter, watching her work. "Parents passed when I was 20. No siblings. I worked our farm in Tennessee for a while, but after they were gone, there wasn't much keeping me there. Sold it and headed west with the money. Worked on ranches from Texas to here, saving to buy my own place." Abigail nodded, understanding the pull of new beginnings. Thomas and I came west for similar reasons. His parents disapproved of our marriage. I was the daughter of their housekeeper. We thought Arizona would give us a fresh start. It can be that, Preston agreed, but it can also be unforgiving. I've learned that lesson well, Abigail said softly, focusing on shaping her dough into a loaf. Preston seemed to sense her need to change the subject. Your feet seem better today. Much, she confirmed, though I don't think I'll be walking to Tucson anytime soon. Preston chuckled. No, I should think not. The stage comes through Miller's Crossing once a week. That's the closest town, about 10 miles from here. I could take you there when you're ready. The offer was practical, exactly what she needed, yet Abigail felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving. That's very kind of you. Their conversation was interrupted by Joe's arrival, the ranch hand poking his head through the door. Boss, that new heifer's having trouble with her calf, might need a hand. Preston straightened immediately. I'll be right there, he turned to Abigail. Duty calls. Will you be all right? Of course, she assured him. Go, I'll have dinner ready when you return. As Preston followed Joe out, Abigail found herself watching him longer than was proper. There was something about the confident set of his shoulders, the capable way he handled every task, that drew her eye. She shook her head, chastising herself for such thoughts. She was a widow of only 6 months, and this man was merely being kind to someone in need. Still, as she worked in his kitchen, she couldn't help but feel a contentment that had been absent from her life for far too long. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Preston worked the ranch from dawn to dusk, while Abigail tended to the house, preparing meals and making small improvements. Her feet healed quickly, and soon she was able to walk without pain, even venturing out to gather eggs from the small henhouse behind the cabin. Joe, initially reserved, warmed to her presence, especially after tasting her cooking. He began bringing her wildflowers he found while checking fence lines and sharing stories of his adventures in the West over dinner. On her 4th evening at the ranch, Abigail sat on the porch, enjoying the cooler air as twilight descended. The sounds of the ranch settling for the night, horses nickering softly in the barn, crickets beginning their evening concert wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. Preston joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her before settling into the chair beside her. Beautiful evening, he commented. It is, Abigail agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. I never knew the desert could be so lovely. They sat in companionable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Abigail found herself stealing glances at Preston's profile, admiring the strong line of his jaw and the quiet contentment in his expression. The stage comes through Miller's Crossing the day after tomorrow, Preston said finally, breaking the silence. I could take you if you're feeling up to the journey. Abigail's heart sank at his words, though she knew she couldn't stay at the ranch indefinitely. Yes, I suppose it's time I continue to Tucson. Preston nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. Your cousin will be worried. We've never been close, Abigail admitted. The offer to stay with her was more duty than desire, I think. Her husband owns a dry goods store. She mentioned they could use help. Sounds like a solid opportunity, Preston said, though Abigail thought she detected a note of reluctance in his voice. Yes, she agreed softly. It does. Another silence fell between them, heavier this time. Abigail sipped her coffee, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. She'd known from the beginning that her stay here was temporary. Yet somehow, in just a few short days, this place had begun to feel like home in a way her cousin's house in Tucson never could. You've brought life back to this place, Preston said suddenly, turning to face her. I didn't realize how empty it was until you were here. Abigail's breath caught at the naked honesty in his eyes. I've enjoyed being here, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. More than I should, perhaps. Preston set his coffee cup aside, his movements deliberate. Abigail, he began, her name sounding different when he said it, richer somehow. I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed, and I wouldn't presume to. That is, I understand if you're not ready to. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "I'm not good with words. What I'm trying to say is that I'd like it very much if you'd consider staying here with me." Abigail stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Preston, you don't have to answer now," he interrupted hastily. "And if you want to go to Tucson, I'll take you. No hard feelings, I just thought you should know that there's a place for you here if you want it." The sincerity in his voice, the vulnerable hope in his eyes, touched something deep within Abigail. Since Thomas's death, she had been merely existing, moving through life without purpose or joy. But here, on this small ranch with this quiet, steadfast man, she had begun to feel alive again. "It's too soon to speak of certain things," she said carefully, "but I would like to stay, at least for a while longer." The smile that broke across Preston's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. "That's all I ask," he said, reaching over to cover her hand with his. "Time to see if this feeling between us might grow into something more." Abigail turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. It felt right, this tentative connection, this new beginning. "I'd like that," she whispered. As summer gave way to fall, Abigail and Preston fell into a partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. She took over the management of the house and garden, expanding the vegetable plot and adding herbs that she used to create remedies for the various ailments that plagued ranch life. Preston taught her to ride, starting with his gentlest mare. Soon, they were taking rides together in the evenings, exploring the boundaries of the ranch. He showed her his favorite places, a hidden meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion, a high ridge that offered views all the way to the mountains, a secluded bend in the creek where the water ran cool and clear, even in the hottest weather. It was at this last spot, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, that their relationship deepened. They had dismounted to let the horses drink, and Abigail had removed her boots to dip her toes in the cool water. "I used to dream of places like this," she confessed, watching ripples spread from her feet. "In Prescott, our home was in town. Thomas worked at the bank. We had a small yard, but nothing like this." Preston sat beside her on the grassy bank. "Did you love him very much?" he asked quietly. Abigail considered the question, grateful that he had asked it directly rather than dancing around the subject as they had for months. "I did," she answered honestly. "He was kind and steady. We had a good marriage, if not a passionate one." She glanced at Preston, finding his gaze intent on her face. "Our families worked together. We grew up as friends. Marriage seemed the natural progression, especially when his parents objected so strongly. It became a point of pride for him, I think, to defy them." "And for you?" Preston asked. "For me, it was escape," Abigail admitted. "From service, from a life of taking orders and cleaning other people's homes. Thomas offered me respectability, a home of my own." She sighed, trailing her fingers through the water. "I sometimes wonder if I loved the idea of him more than the man himself." Preston was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "Does that make you feel guilty?" "Sometimes," she nodded. "But I was a good wife to him. I honored our vows. I grieved him sincerely. I just..." "Just what?" Preston prompted when she fell silent. Abigail looked up at him, vulnerability in her gaze. "I just never felt with him what I feel when I'm with you." The confession hung between them, honest and raw. Preston reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Abigail," he said, her name a caress on his lips. "May I kiss you?" Her heart fluttered at the request, so formally stated yet burning with restrained desire. "Yes," she whispered. Preston leaned forward, one hand coming up to cup her cheek as his lips found hers. The kiss was tender at first, a question more than a demand. When Abigail responded, her hand rising to rest against his chest, Preston deepened the kiss, pulling her closer. When they finally parted, Abigail was breathless, her cheeks flushed. "Oh," she said softly. Preston's smile was warm with satisfaction. "Oh, indeed." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, their hands finding each other's whenever the trail allowed. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Preston pulled out his guitar and played for her, something he'd never done before. The music, like the man, was straightforward yet soulful, and Abigail found herself moved to tears by the simple beauty of it. When Joe came in from his evening chores, he took one look at them sitting close together, Abigail's head resting on Preston's shoulder, and grinned knowingly. "About time," he muttered, heading for his own cabin with a wave as winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert. Preston began making improvements to the cabin. He added a second bedroom, working in the evenings and on Sundays when ranch work allowed. Abigail helped where she could, learning to sand boards smooth and mix whitewash for the walls. "You're building for the future," she observed one evening as they worked side by side, fitting glass into a new window frame. "Our future," Preston corrected gently, pausing in his work to look at her. "If you'll have me, that is." Abigail's hands stilled. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Preston set down his tools and took her hands in his. "I had planned something more romantic," he admitted. "But yes, Abigail Lawson, I'm asking you to be my wife, to build a life here with me. To make this ranch the home it was always meant to be." Tears filled Abigail's eyes as joy welled up inside her. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston James." He pulled her into his arms, his kiss filled with promise and passion. When they separated, both breathing heavily, Preston pressed his forehead to hers. "I've loved you since the moment I found you on that dusty trail," he confessed. "When you opened your eyes and looked up at me, I was lost." "And I've loved you since you carried me to your wagon," Abigail whispered back. "I just didn't know it yet." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at Miller's Crossing, with Joe and the preacher's wife as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, but Abigail felt more beautiful in her new blue dress sewn by her own hand than she ever had in her life. The way Preston looked at her as she walked down the aisle, his eyes shining with love and pride, made her feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Preston's tenderness, his careful attention to her pleasure, confirmed what Abigail had come to believe, that what they shared was rare and precious, a love born of mutual respect and genuine desire. As they lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Abigail traced the line of her husband's jaw with gentle fingers. "Do you ever wonder at the circumstances that brought us together?" she asked. "If I hadn't been forced to walk that day, if you hadn't come along when you did." Preston caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I believe some things are meant to be," he said simply. "You were meant to collapse on that trail, and I was meant to find you. Everything else flows from that moment." Abigail nestled closer, her head finding its place on his chest. "Then I'm grateful for tired feet and dusty trails," she murmured, "because they led me to you." Spring came to the desert in a riot of color, wildflowers carpeting the land in blues, yellows, and purples. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with new calves in the pastures and a thriving garden beside the cabin. Preston had added a proper porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the house, with a swing where Abigail loved to sit in the evenings, watching the sun sink behind the distant mountains. It was on this swing, as April turned to May, that Abigail shared her news with Preston. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand as he sat beside her after a long day working with the cattle. Preston smiled, his face weathered from the sun but relaxed in the contentment of their life together. "What is it, love?" "I visited Dr. Miller in town yesterday while you were meeting with the cattle buyer," Abigail began, her free hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "He confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now." Preston's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Abigail, are you saying?" She nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. "We're going to have a baby, Preston, in late October, the doctor thinks." With a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral, Preston lifted Abigail from the swing, spinning her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet. "A baby," he repeated, awe in his voice as his hand joined hers over her stomach. "Our baby." "Our baby," Abigail confirmed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "The first of many, I hope." Preston kissed her then, pouring all his love and joy into the gesture. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "When I found you on that trail a year ago, I thought I was just helping a woman in need. I never imagined I was finding my whole future." Abigail reached up to brush away a tear that had escaped down his cheek. "And I never imagined that collapsing from exhaustion would lead me to the greatest happiness I've ever known." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, planning for their expanding family, dreaming of the future they would build together. From the direst of circumstances had come the greatest of blessings, a love neither had expected but both had desperately needed. A love born on a dusty trail and nurtured in the wild beauty of the Arizona territory. A love that would sustain them through all the years to come.